Aloha and thank you for attending tonight's Thursday, April 8th, 2021 Hanauma Talk Seminar Series presented by the City and County of Honolulu and the Hawaii Sea Grant Hanauma Bay Education Program. For the month of April, we are partnering with the Hawaii Audubon Society. We have the pleasure of hosting Teya and Penniman, who is the coordinator for the multi-agency partnership Birds Not Mosquitoes. My name is Gavney Y, and I am the Hanauma Bay Education Program Outreach Program Coordinator. I have listed my contact number as well as the email if you are interested in any of the other past seminars that we've had. Also, I've listed our Hanauma Talks YouTube channel, so if you guys want to check out past seminars, they're all available on our channel. So a background on our Hanauma Talks seminar series, the education program partners with organizations across Hawaii to showcase educational talks with leading researchers, environmental leaders, natural resource managers, and cultural practitioners. It starts promptly at 6:30 p.m. and typically ends at 7:30 p.m., which consists of a 45-minute presentation time as well as a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. Just a few friendly reminders. Please keep all your questions till the end of the presentation, or feel free to type it in the chat box at any time. Also, please turn off your microphone and video function during the presentation to allow a smoother talk. So just a little background on the Birds Not Mosquitoes partnership. This program is evaluating the possible use of incompatible insect technique to suppress mosquito populations at a landscape scale in Hawaii. Program's goal is to advance this technology to protect Hawaii's native forest birds from avian malaria. So just a little background on our presenter tonight. Her name is Teya M. Penniman. And like I said, she is the coordinator for the multi-agency partnership, Birds Not Mosquitoes. She has a background in ornithology, law, mediation, writing, and invasive species management. And she works for the American Bird Conservancy. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Teya.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I recognize a number of folks in the audience tonight, and so it's wonderful to have you here. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about our program and about our birds that we're trying to protect. I also have in the audience with me is Luca Zavas, our newest member to the team, and she'll introduce herself a little bit and say a few words at the end as well. So yeah, I have worked on invasive species and natural resource management in Hawaii for the last 2 decades. This is certainly the most challenging project that I've ever tackled, but I also believe it is the most important one. And I hope that you will feel the same. Also, just want to give a shout out to all of the work that goes on at Hanauma Bay. That is such a special place, and so many places in our islands are unique and amazing, and I appreciate your interest in being here tonight to learn about another part of our amazing environment and natural places and what you might be able to do to help protect them. So when people think about forest birds, they often think about honeycreepers, and I also have this, for me anyway, I wasn't that familiar with our native bird species until I started, as familiar until I started working on this project. And I think the EEV, I think the iconic long bill, brightly plumaged, and a nectar feeder. But it turns out that's not really the case for all of our honeycreepers. And I think you're likely familiar with the history of our honeycreepers, how they came to be here. The first arrival, or the first colonist, if you were, was an Asian rose finch, not unlike our house finches that you may see. So with that conical bill, somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago. And from that one founder, probably just wasn't one bird, obviously, there had to be at least 2, probably more. From that came this amazing array of different species where At one time, there were at least 50 different species of honeycreepers. And the graph on the right shows the understood, one of the more recent understandings of the lineage of those species. So, you know, which ones are more closely related to each other. And this is looking at mostly ones that are here now. Fortunately, one of them is no longer here, that being the poʻuli. And so from those few, that one initial species, we came with all of these different birds with their different niches that they occupied and their different bill types, with some of them being like little warbler bills and some of them being seed eaters, and of course the nectivores, the nectar feeders, and also insect eaters with, for example, the Maui parrotbill or the kiwikiu who digs around and eats grubs. The poʻuli actually was a snail eater. So just an amazing diversity of these species that we have that are found nowhere else in the world. So endemic to Hawaii, all of these birds. Sorry. So what's the status of our Hawaiian birds, of our honeycreepers especially? And unfortunately, it's not good. That previous slide that I had up there showed that we had 56 species at one time, and we now have 17, including the 2 that are in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. But of the remaining 15 in our main Hawaiian Islands, only 3 of them are really considered to be at stable numbers, and a full 12 of them are either vulnerable, declining, or seriously threatened and endangered. So we know we're not on a good trajectory for these species. Okay, so which ones, of the ones that we have, I just want to focus a little bit on what's the current status when we say imperiled or endangered. What does that mean in terms of how many birds are actually left? And for on Kauai and Maui seem to have ones that are the most imperiled. The kiwikiu, the Maui parrotbill is the one that has, right now, we believe, the fewest number of birds, and maybe around 150, maybe up to 200, but the latest estimate was right around 150. And that you may have heard recently, there's been some discussion about possibly moving them, some of them to the mainland for some captive breeding. And there was a project that concluded just a couple of years ago, last year or the year before, where they tried to translocate them on Maui to move them to better habitat, and it unfortunately wasn't successful. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you can see these numbers are really perilously low, and when they get this low, it makes it hard to can be hard even to maintain genetic diversity. So many of you I know are on Oahu, and so I also wanted just to focus a little bit on the forest birds that you do have on Oahu, and those include the elepaio, which actually is not a honeycreeper, but it is one of our forest birds, and the Oahu amakihi and the apapane. And one of the things that we've been talking about lately is, as we're going out to the public and sharing our information, is that we know that a lot of people really haven't had the opportunity to get to know our forest birds because they're so restricted. The areas that they occupy are so restricted. And so I was thinking about these different species and thinking first about the elepaio. I thought about if you run across them in the forest, and especially easier to see on the island of Kauai, the Kauai elepaio, it's like, they want to know, if there's just so curious. They want to know, is there a party going on? If there's a party, I think I want to be there. What's happening? And the amakihi, its behavior in the forest, it's like a bouncy ball. They're definitely at the party, and they're going to be going through all parts of the room to know who's there and checking them out. And the apapane, I think of as, it's also a flitty bird, but it's also super alert. They're going to know who's there, who was drinking what, who went home with whom. So, you know, they all have these different personalities to them. One of the other things that I've learned recently that really touched me is that many of our honeycreepers are can be monogamous, so they mate for life, but also they really live in family groups. The young stay with them for the Akiapola'au 10 months or more. And then they also stay as the young, in their first year or two, stay as helpers. So they hang out as families and help with the rearing. And an interesting thing that I learned about how connected the health of our forests and the health of our birds are is that in pristine forests, for example, for the Alauahio, the Maui creeper, they found that 95% of the birds had those family helpers. And in the more disturbed areas, it was more like 30%. So they do, the quality of their habitat definitely affects their overall lifestyle. And we're big on ohana here, and our birds are also. So status of other forest birds, when I was talking about the elepaio, really there's only about 1,200 birds of our elepaio left. And the pueoi is a thrush on Kauai that also is quite endangered. Our forest birds also, of course, are family to our native Hawaiians. Many of our olelo no'iau, our proverbs speak of forest birds as images, as symbols, as ways of telling story. And then, of course, feather work remains a traditional practice, although, of course, now there are not enough birds to allow the use of our native birds for that. So just that connection is very deep and very important for us to continue to respect and honor that. Our insects are also, we have many, I'm talking about insects for a reason, because now we're going to start talking about one in particular. And we have more than 10,000 native insects, of which nearly 60% are found nowhere else in the world, which is really quite astonishing. So of all of those, how many of those 6,000 or 10,000 insects do you think are mosquitoes? If you guessed none, you would be correct. We have no native, there are no native mosquitoes in the islands. Unfortunately, we have quite a few of them that cause problems. And the one that we are most concerned about, the Culex quinquefasciatus, it was the first one to arrive in our islands, arriving, I'm based on Maui, and it showed up in Lahaina in about 1826 on probably a whaling vessel. And then you can see from this slide, not only when they arrive, but which ones are the night biters and the day biters. The other thing about the Culex is that it really likes birds, even though it's a southern house mosquito, and yes, it will bite humans. It is one of the philic. It really likes to get blood from birds. So that would be the females, of course, it would be having that particular appetite. They are found dispersed around different parts of the world, but mostly considered subtropical species. And so their biology is also important to us. One female can lay 300 or 400 eggs in a raft, and those rafts float on the water. And it doesn't take much. So in our forests, where there might just be a few little pockets of water, that's enough for the Culex to reproduce. The eggs hatch in just a couple days. And then the larval and pupal stages take another 8 to 10 days. So they can complete their full life cycle from laying the eggs to being an adult in 2 weeks to a couple months. It depends on the habitat and the environment and the climate. Another interesting thing about this mosquito that we're so concerned about is that the female only needs to mate once. She can store sperm. So that means that she can lay over her lifetime up to 5 egg rafts. And, but for each time before she lays those eggs, she needs a blood meal. She needs that protein. And so that's what's driving her reproductive clock. So in the math, doing the math, in just a couple of months, one female can produce between 1,200 and 1,500 eggs. So that's, nobody likes mosquitoes, nobody likes to get bitten, but our main concern is about what gets transmitted when that female bites the bird. And that's where avian malaria comes in, which is, yes, there are many factors that have led to the decline of our native forest birds. But right now, the thing that is really pushing our forest birds to the edge is avian malaria, which is itself an intracellular parasite. And our Hawaiian birds are super susceptible to it, primarily because both the mosquitoes and this parasite, avian malaria, are relatively recent introductions to Hawaii. Like we pointed out, mosquitoes didn't get here until 1826. Avian malaria was first detected maybe another 100 years after that. And they are limited by elevational range. If it gets too cold, you're not going to get the mosquitoes, which if you're anywhere, you know that. And the same is true for the parasite. So the diagram on the right basically is the main points, the main takeaways from there is that the parasite, the Plasmodium, needs to have both of those hosts to complete its life cycle. It needs the mosquito, and it also needs a vertebrate, which in our case that we're concerned about is the birds. So as I mentioned, we have this elevational limitation for mosquitoes that has historically considered to be around 1,500 meters or 4,500 feet. It's been pushing up with a warming climate. That's really what we're seeing. And we see that not just from surveys that are done. So folks are out there, biologists with different forest bird projects, with the US Geological Survey, who are doing trapping to capture mosquitoes and to try and figure out what's the density of them, how many of them are there. But unfortunately, we're also seeing it in the decline of our birds. And as I mentioned, the project to move a number of our QBQ on Maui to better habitat, when they did that, they did the research in advance to thinking, to determine there aren't mosquitoes here. They never would have moved the birds to a higher elevation if they thought there were going to be mosquitoes there. But unfortunately, after they got them, released them, they all died within just a few days. And the follow-up surveys indicated, yes, it was avian malaria that did them in. So the main point here being warming climate, mosquitoes are moving up. With that, the avian malaria is getting into these areas, these last refugia for our native birds. And so that brings us to, what do we do? What are the solutions beyond captive rearing or trying to create better habitat and move them to that? And so in 2016, there was, of course, the wonderful World Conservation Congress here, and there was a workshop there. And then there was a follow-up meeting on the Big Island of experts from around the world to look at what can Hawaii do. This is recognizing not only the human health impacts of mosquitoes, but also the impacts to our forest birds. And so they came up with a number of recommendations, and the key one that folks who work in conservation here took away from that is to try this solution, to use the solution of Wolbachia. So this is our third actor in this story that we're telling, the first being the birds, actually I guess it's so the birds, the mosquito, the Plasmodium, it's our fourth. So Wolbachia is our fourth actor in this story of as our potential solution. So it's also an intracellular bacteria found in many different insects. So actually it's so widely distributed in the world that it's been estimated that it's common in approximately 60% of all insects. So it's naturally occurring. It's also found in our species here, in our Culex here, of course. Culex is a native, but it has the Wolbachia in it. It is maternally inherited, meaning it passes from the mom has it, it gets passed to the next generation. And this bacteria maximizes its spread by manipulating the reproduction of its host. So it's pretty clever organism in terms of making sure that it keeps going. And this has drawn the attention of scientists over the years for quite a number of decades as to, well, that's interesting. How can we use this to our advantage? And so just a little bit on how it works. This seems like a lot of images in there, a lot of information in there, but I'm going to walk you through it. So basically, if you have a female that doesn't have Wolbachia, because like all infections, you might have certain bacteria and I don't have it. So same is true for mosquitoes. So if a female doesn't have it and the male doesn't have it, they're going to be successful at reproducing eggs. And so this is what we call, they're compatible. So they're reproductively compatible. If the female has the Wolbachia and the male has the Wolbachia, they're going to be successful at laying eggs. The female will lay eggs that are viable. If the female has it and the male doesn't have it, they're also going to produce viable offspring. So this is where that pass maternally, so it's still going to work. If the female doesn't have it and the male has it, they're not successful. So this is where the presence of this Wolbachia, the Wolbachia strain, it wants its own strain to be successful at being passed and or just to pass it. So their reproductive strategy is basically, you're not, you have sterile eggs, or they use the Wolbachia has other approaches as well that I won't go into. But there's also an important thing to come back to where we are right now, is that this one up here, the mating between male and female that both have Wolbachia, it assumes they're both the same strain. It turns out that if this, imagine this being green, and so this female has, this female has Wolbachia, but it's a different strain than this one, we also get this result, or we can get this result. And this is what we're looking at, because our females have Wolbachia already in our population. So again, if you have a wild strain female and then a male with a different strain, and the strategy is that you raise a whole population of mosquitoes with this different strain, this incompatible strain of Wolbachia, that then leads to unsuccessful reproduction. And then you release them in massive numbers, and the females, like, she just wants to reproduce. And so if you've got 1,000 males out there that have this different strain of Wolbachia and 10 of the ones that have her compatible strain, the odds are more likely that she's going to end up mating with males that have this incompatible strain. And over time, then you get this reproduction, this suppression of the population. So that's the way it works. On the big picture, the details of it are also that you have to first transinfect the male with a different strain. And so that work has already gone on at Michigan State University. They have successfully taken our Hawaii mosquitoes, and we shipped our Hawaii mosquitoes there. They cleared them, they cleared the Wolbachia bacteria from those insects, from those mosquitoes, and then reinfected them with this different strain of Wolbachia. And then they've got males and females, and that's what they want. They have that same strain in the lab there. But then they take only the males, they put them with the females that don't have that strain, and they have successfully shown incompatibility. So we know that we now have this tool that will work. And that's where we are right now with that part in our process. Just to explain, I didn't cover that, is that what you then have to do is you have to only release the males with incompatible strains. So you've got males and females with both of it. And so you have to do sex sorting to make sure you're only releasing the males with the incompatible strain. So does it work? Well, it's actually, this technology, this strategy is being used in at least 15 different countries around the world. Mostly all of these are for, not mostly, they're all for health purposes. So to suppress Aedes albopictus, working on it for Aedes aegypti. So the Aedes albopictus is the one you're probably most familiar with. That's the Asian tiger mosquito. And for a number of other different species, including in the South Pacific. So it does work, it's being used, but this will be the first time, and that's why it's actually super exciting. This will be the first time it's ever used for conservation. And we have some challenges. So yay, it works, but we also have some really big challenges because we're talking about a really massive area compared to the places where it's mostly been used. In terrain, it's urban. So you can drive down the road and roll down your window and release the mosquitoes. Whereas we're talking about remote forest and where access is difficult. We'll need helicopters, we may need to be using drones, of course, a different purpose. Some of the health applications have Bill Gates and governments, and we have government and NGOs, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But our challenge is immense, but we also think worth it. Just a little visual for what some of the habitat might be like that we're working in. But we also really benefit from the fact that we have a very strong partnership. So this group came together, gosh, at least 3 or 4 years ago to really start to come together after that conference in 2016 to say, how do we do this? How do we move this forward? And so we have all of these different state and federal and nonprofit organizations who are working to make this a reality. I won't go into the details of all of our work, but basically we have to figure out the operations of it, the production, working with people on the mainland, sorry about that, to help us with that, who already do this work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for that. Doing the background research is super important because we have to know where to release these mosquitoes. We need to know how many in order to overflood the background population. We need to know the timing of when we do it because mosquitoes are actually seasonal in our activities, and we need to know how often. So all of those things we're in the process of figuring out. And then of course, we just need funding for it. But very, very important is community engagement. This needs to be done with community support. These birds are our heritage, and especially Native Hawaiian heritage, ohana. And it's a big decision to be doing this. We think it's the right one, but we need to be having those conversations just as we're having this evening. And so our timeline for what it's looking like right now, so I talked about the transinfection being complete. We need to, our permission is not only from the community, our permission also needs to come from our state and federal regulators, which will involve community engagement in those processes. And so there's a state permit that we need to get to bring, even though it's our mosquito, I mean, our Hawaiʻi biotype that we're bringing back in, it's going to be a little different. You know, it's got this new strain of Wolbachia in it. And then we also need to have permit approval from the Environmental Protection Agency, because this strategy is actually considered as a biopesticide because we are trying to control an insect population. And so then we'll be doing trials. We need to have an experimental use permit before you can have this product registered as a biopesticide. And so we have to be able to show that it's effective, that it's safe, that it does what we intend for it to do. And then with eventual releases, perhaps as early as 2023, but really much more likely to be 2024 under the timeline that the way things are currently working. I talked about how you get it there. We have talked about the possibility of using drones, and don't worry, this isn't going to be over Waikiki. We're talking about our forested areas, and there are folks who have been working on using drones to deliver Wolbachia and incompatible mosquitoes elsewhere in the world. So yeah, it would have, it won't be the UPS package down there, but or Amazon package, but it would be a little small unit. And so I just want to touch a little bit on some of our community engagement challenges. We said that why are we doing it? That's not a challenge. We want the information from the public, from the community. Sorry, I'll stop putting that up, having my cursor up there. One of the challenges is that our forest birds aren't well known because our forests are relatively inaccessible. And I started out by talking about that. It's really, especially on some of our islands like Maui, to get in to see the forest birds, you almost have to have, other than Hosmer's Grove, but Haleakala, or some of the areas, you have to have special access to get in there. They used to be common. They used to be widespread across the island. So that's a sad thing, but it means a lot of people just don't know them. And then there's also potential opposition to this approach. It's a technology, use of a technology to do this. And it's in some ways it's simple in theory. We try to refer to it as mosquito birth control. That seems like, hey, we're just gonna do birth control for mosquitoes. But as I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it still takes a little bit to explain it in ways that are hopefully simple. And then the other challenge is that this is often lumped with genetic approaches because people are looking at using gene drive to modify mosquitoes. That's not what this project is about, but there are folks who are working on exploring that. It's still quite a ways off as an option. So that's a potential challenge. And then our defining, well, who are our priority audiences? Certainly our community leaders, our Native land organizations, those who use the resource. And in this case, it's not only the forest, but could be feathers, even though that's not happening now. There's that idea, that vision that some of us have is that these birds could become so abundant in the future if we're truly successful with this technique that you could have them in your backyard. You could get to know them. Maybe there would even be enough for Hawaiians to be able to do traditional practices again. And so our community engagement audiences are the usual folks, but you, as I started out saying, you are super important because you're already, I'm suspecting you're already a group of people who care about and want to protect our special places and our special critters. I mentioned already our partners, so just wanted again to give a shout out to all of them. We couldn't do this work. It's challenging when you have all of these different agencies, each with their own mandates and their own interests, but we all know that we all have the shared common interest of being successful at this. And so I want to close just by saying that yes, it is. And before I close, I also want to introduce Luca and give her an opportunity to say a few words. But I can't emphasize enough that we really are at a crisis crossroads. We're fighting for the survival of at least a dozen species. that are found nowhere else in the world. What we're proposing is complicated, but it's also doable, and we believe it is our best shot at present at stopping extinction. So with that, I want to invite Luca to say a few words about her role in this project and share any thoughts she might have. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Thanks, Teya. That was a wonderful presentation. And aloha, everybody. Good evening. My name is Luca, and I am the most recent addition to the Birds Not Mosquitoes team. And I look forward to reaching out to the community and helping to spread the word about this amazing opportunity that we have to help our forest birds be able to survive into the future, so that not only will my son be able to see them, hopefully one day in the backyard of Oahu, but also that, you know, his kids and their grandkids can go. And so that these mo'olelo that we have and these olelo no'iaus that we have don't become something of the past that we can't even reference anymore, because we don't know who the birds are. We don't know the characteristics, like Teya was talking about, them being the flirty bunch or being all over the place. So I really look forward to meeting all of you. And please, Teya,
yeah, let me
is there a
put
way
that
to get my...
I'll put that back up. I forgot my last slide, which was...
And as of now,
some
because
contact.
of COVID and all that, I don't think we'll be able to meet in person quite yet, but I would love to Zoom in to your guys' schools, community groups, anything, just to help create this pilina, this relationship between the forest birds that we have and our wider community. So you can reach both me and Teya at our emails here on the screen.
Great, thank you, Luca. So I'll leave that up for a minute and continue to leave that up for a little bit. So there are a couple of, at least one question there. So after release, how soon before the mosquito population declines? That's a great question. And you know, we'd love for it to happen right away, but it's probably going to take a little bit of time. And we actually have Catherine McClure, who is a postdoc, has a postdoc position with Cornell University. She's been doing the modeling to look at all of these different scenarios. So I wish I could give you a easy answer of, oh, 2 months, a year, but we don't know exactly how quickly. And the other thing I will say, it's really going to depend on the site, because some have much fewer densities of the mosquitoes, and some have more. So it's going to be variable. Yeah, it's going to be variable. And then your other question, Pat, was, do releases need to be continuous to keep the population down? Yes, that's a great question. On the plus side, that means that if you decide, you know, if we decide this isn't working, or, you know, whatever reason, we don't want to do it anymore, you've not changed things. It's not, in that sense, it's not genetic in that it, like a gene drive approach where it keeps going. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So it does need to be continuous, but presumably the assumption, and this has been shown elsewhere in the world, they will get knocked back. You won't have to release as many. So two things could happen. Either either then it costs less, or you say, hey, we can start to expand to the area that's mosquito free, because another vision would be, as we talked about, having mosquitoes in, in lower elevation, I mean, having birds in lower elevations. There are also places like Lanai. Lanai, it's so low elevation, and Kauai is pretty low elevation. You could start to maybe even bring back some birds that aren't there. So how can we support your work? Gosh, that's a great question, Yvonne. No one's asked me that question before, but I love it. I should have a good answer to that. If you want to message me, if anybody wants to message me, send me an email. I will figure that out. A logical place would be to ABC Birds, because we do have this as a key project to American Bird Conservancy, and we have some dedicated funding site for that. So it would be dedicated funding for that. So send me an email and I will let you know. Any other questions? I would love to, if people don't have questions, I would love to open it up just for any input or feedback, like because we're still pretty new at going out to the community, and I love to get feedback of what works. What did you find interesting? What was it like, oh man, you lost me at at this point. So I welcome any kind of feedback, either it doesn't have to be like, yeah, that was awesome. Looking more for meaningful feedback from folks about how we can make our presentations better. What would you like to know more about? Like, are there more facts about our birds that you would like to have, or anything you want to share would be appreciated.
There's another question from Pat. I don't know if you answered that. Are there any other strategies being considered or in progress to reduce mosquito populations?
Are there other strategies? That's actually a great question. Thanks for pointing that out. So there are two forest bird projects. There are a number of forest bird recovery projects in our islands, and the two that are most engaged with us are the Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project and the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project. And both of them have been doing active efforts to try and control mosquito populations in the forest. So doing some larvicide, not talking about like, and we're flying a plane, and dropping pesticide in the forest. No, we're not doing that. They're not doing that. But unfortunately, the other options for controlling mosquitoes are pesticide. And so, we don't really want to do that in our habitat, but there have been some of that. You could also do trapping, which they do, although, with a CO2 canister and to attract the females in, and some gravid traps. So, and those are not, don't use pesticides, but it's such, it's just not feasible in terms of the scale of the area that we need to cover and the terrain that we're working in. So any other questions or input, thoughts?
Please feel free to ask anything. Oh, Pat has another one. Do mosquitoes have predators?
Yeah, they do, actually. There are things that eat them. There's actually another mosquito that eats mosquitoes, but there aren't very many of them, and not enough to really do them in. Bats eat some mosquitoes, and unfortunately, coqui frogs don't really seem to eat many mosquitoes. I would think, well, gosh, shouldn't have so many on some places of the islands, but they don't really eat many mosquitoes. So there are some, and then of course, because they lay their larvae in water, there could also be freshwater organisms that are eating them. But 2 points, not enough to make any kind of impact on their population. And then the other thing that people sometimes bring up is, well, but if they're food for other critters, are we going to be impacting those other populations, those other species? And that's something that certainly we'll need to address in our regulatory process when we go through the environmental assessment. But studies of that there are no native mosquitoes in Hawaii. So if there are any impacts, it's not going to be any of our native species. And generally, the conclusion has been it is negligible. So basically, this project will not affect, will not have negative impacts for other non-target organisms.
Sure. So anybody else got any other questions? We have about 10 minutes, I guess, 15 minutes.
And I don't know if, you know, I don't know if you do this or not. I'm happy to hang out, you know, if when you're ready to draw it to a close, I'm happy to hang out if people want to drop off and just chat as well. Anybody wants to do that. Because I know sometimes people don't want to. Anyway,
Yeah.
you know, that is.
So people just want to talk story.
Yep. Yeah.
Let's see any other questions. But if you guys do have any questions after we are done with the seminar, please feel free to contact Teya or myself, and I'll get it to her. Once again, thank you, Teya, for presenting tonight, and my coworker Morgan for handling all of the behind-the-scenes work, hosting this seminar. Please feel free to check out our Hanauma Talks YouTube channel for past seminars that if you guys are interested in at your own leisure. And hope you guys can please tune in to next week, Thursday, April 15th. We are hosting David Hirenbach, and the topic will be presented will be Act Locally, but Think Globally, considering multiple ocean drivers of wedge-tailed shearwater populations.
Nice.
With that, yeah. Anybody else got any questions? Last.
I'll just say thank you for the opportunity to present here tonight, and thank you to everyone for coming. It was really nice to have you all here.
With that, thank you for tuning in to tonight's Hanauma Bay Education Program Hanauma Talk seminar, and hope you can tune in for next week's seminar. So with that, have a great night and have a good weekend. Thank you, Teya.
Thank you.
And Luca.
Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you.
Aloha.